Hello and welcome to the HR People Pod, the CIPD's fortnightly podcast bringing you the topical stories and expert insights on issues impacting the people profession and the world of work. I'm Steve George, Head of Learning at the CIPD, sitting in for David D'Souza, and joining me in the studio today we have
Francisca Beloso, Inclusive Diversity Associate Director of Alvarez and Marsal, which is a management consultancy in London.
I'm Alix Bolton. I'm Chief People Officer for Europe for a business called Smollan. We do retail solutions and outsourcing for some of the world's coolest brands and product developers.
Thank you, Alex.
I'm Kevin Green. I'm the Chief People Officer of FirstBus, taking on some group responsibility, and we're a FTSE 250 transport company.
And it's a pleasure to have you all join us for what I know will be a fantastic conversation. A quick reminder for all our CIPD member listeners that now's the time to renew your membership too. Staying active in membership means that you continue to access our professional community resources, our learning, our support, and all that credibility that helps you make an impact at work and beyond. Your membership keeps you connected, current, and confident in a fast-changing world of work, so don't lose that edge. Renew by the 1st of July at cipd.org and keep the power of membership working for you. Now, let's get to know our panel a little more. So tell us a little about yourself. Okay. What's caught your attention in the last week, and is there anything you've been watching or reading, Francisca?
I guess like everyone, I don't want to talk too much about politics, but unfortunately, especially as my role is inclusive diversity, and also I'm responsible for the EMEA region. So it's not only the UK, it's the whole, how the whole world is reacting to that, and also how the different organizations and people and the context there. So I think anything related to people, anything related to inclusion, and how the not only organizations referring to what you mentioned earlier, is as well, more importantly, how the people are reacting to that, how expecting the organizations to respond to that. I think that's what is grabbing my attention. So it will be too long. We will need the whole day if I start going on about everything I read, but just a bit of a summary.
Flicking through a book called Net Positive at the minute. So written by a chap called Paul Polman, who was the chief exec of Unilever for a long time, who's a good friend of our chief exec over at Smollan. So flicking through that, watching things on the TV, but I'm growing a slight addiction to romance and fantasy novels, which is my chosen way to wind down in the evening. Excellent. That's all I'll say on that.
Thank you.
In terms of reading, I've been sort of dipping in and out of a business book called Ruthlessly Caring by Amy Walton Cohen. And it's about paradoxical mindsets for leaders. And for me, I think it's very insightful. So there's things like responsibly daring or ruthlessly caring. And it gets you to think about what we're asking of leaders. So I've been dipping in and out of that for about 6 months. And then on TV, there's only one thing really that's grabbed my attention, and that's Mobland. And I've been addicted to it. It comes out every Sunday. And I sort of can't wait till the evening to watch it. And it's an amazing performance. So Pierce Brosnan, Helen Mirren. It's about a family set of gangsters, but Tom Hardy is just exceptional. In terms of references to HR, there's a bit about strategic thinking, taking a long-term view, but there's also lots of violence and lots of humour. So it's escapism. Absolutely.
Exactly.
I think the ability to respond to changing circumstance, I mean, it's just incredible. Slightly unhinged, amazing production, and definitely keeps you hooked.
It does.
I think in terms of the people space, thinking about how we craft our approach to different things, but you definitely know who's in charge in that show as well.
And also it's about human nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a family at the centre of that, and
that's what we do.
You've got all sorts of personalities being played out. So as always, there's you can grab some insight from it, but I'd certainly recommend it.
Some great recommendations for myself. I've been reading a book called Ember of the Hands, which is it's a history of the Vikings told through ordinary objects. Similar to you, Kevin, I've tried to shoehorn in some kind of business relevance to it. The closest I can get is it's not about the kings and the raiders and the kind of Vikings we know. So it's the ordinary stories told through things like combs that are engraved with runes and things.
Okay, interesting.
So my shoehorning in of the business context is however much we think we know something, if we broaden the narrative that we're prepared to listen to and understand, then we get more context and deeper understanding. So for everything that we discussed today, we'll be talking about the general principles of what's happening. So we all know as experienced professionals that it's very difficult to know what's going on behind the scenes on some of the big stories. So we'll take the stories as the jumping off point for the discussions that we have. And the first story I want to kick off with is one about pay incentives and how reasonable it is to reward compliance with rules versus rewarding positive performance and behaviours. So we've seen in recent days that another high street bank has joined a bit of a trend, particularly within that sector, but by no means exclusively, where compliance with returning to office mandates is being factored in when awarding bonuses or pay rises. So context is always key, but it does prompt an interesting debate when we talk about performance and it's linked to annual salary reviews. And further, how much weight is actually being given to policy compliance as opposed to performance when making these decisions? How can policy compliance be equated with behaviours that might be reasonable to be reviewed and rewarded?
Where do you start with it? Because, performance itself as a concept is so wide and dynamic and sort of lives and breathes in the organisation. So I think that there's certain mechanisms that you need to have in businesses that are the undercurrent of, how the business runs or the target operating model or something like that. But the way that people perform within those frameworks and the clarity that the business gives can be, so wildly varied across many different chasms. We could probably talk about it all day, if I'm honest. I've seen it in different businesses, depending on what the business model has been. But the current sort of shift to back to office versus visibility is value and that type of thing. It's a false economy, if I'm honest.
Sure.
We've tricked ourselves into thinking that physical presence equals productivity, and it absolutely doesn't. Seen an interesting comment on in catching up in one of our HR leader groups this morning on WhatsApp around if that was the case, and it got me thinking about this conversation. Take the likes of AI and the whole way that holistically the world of work and the future of work and how we do work is changing. AI has no physical presence in an office, yet it now forms part of, most of our, everyday way. So it can't then just come down to the people to be physically present and then rewarded and then, we've got to give people autonomy and trust and a way of showing up that is good for them.
I think we forget about the context here sometimes as an organisation. We just say, yes, I think you alluded to that before, you get a mandate, but without putting any context, just because I say so. And going back to your point, a bit going back to we are going backwards rather than being forward. Yes, it's important, I think, and I believe that sense of the connection, the power of that networking and the collaboration. But it has to be intentional. Just me to be there sitting on my desk doing what? Is that really benefiting the business, myself as an individual in terms of that collaboration? And I want to encourage as an organization is really driving my performance. Are we understanding, that's what I'm referring to, the context. What is the impact on some people may have care responsibility? I'm not talking only about mothers. It can be parents, it can be people that they have any other type of responsibilities, any kind of disability as well that they might have an impact. And let's not forget, and I have explained that this morning, transport is not great. If we have a great transport and much cheaper, I'm sure that will maybe so that's what I'm talking about, the context, so it's very easy for someone seated on their, ivory tower, say, I want everyone here, but I get driven here by a chauffeur, for example, and I go a nanny at home. But the people that they do work for me, and they will have that impact, they have a life and they have a number of financial considerations. So are we taking into account that inclusion to make sure, that's what I call about the context. And also the people need to understand, why are you asking me to come to the office? Are we explaining that as part of my communication or not?
Sure.
I think there's a big role for HR in this debate, actually, because the bit that I see time and time again in the headlines and when you start to look at the stories is there's been a decision by a chief executive or a board to say we've got to work 3 days or 4 days or whatever is in the office. And there's very little evidence produced to back that up.
Yeah.
And there's
Why?
very little. Why? What's the why? Why? What are we going to be able to do by being in an office that we can't do at home? And for me, if we're in a process where we're trying to engage our workforce and treat them as adults, then you've got to listen to them. There's got to be a dialogue. And this takes you back to command and control and arbitrary decisions by leaders because they think it's right. And I think they've got to be able to articulate the why, which is your point. But I also think they've got to listen and understand what it means for individuals. So rather than just making a mandate, I think you engage your workforce over time, which is, we believe there's a productivity improvement that if people work in it, so let's have that debate and then let's try and accommodate individuals so that we retain people. And if we don't do this, I think as a profession, if we don't stand up and push back and get the organisation to face into these issues, I think you will then be dealing with the consequences, which people will make choices about where they work and who they work for. So I think there's a big lesson in the HR profession here, not to just accept decisions and to get organisations to think things through in a much more robust way, but also do it with people rather than to people.
Yeah, exactly.
We can go one step further with that as well. And, whatever policy we mandate, we need to then know that leaders locally have got the ability to see it through or to tell the story or to, support the business's direction. So there's no one size fits all approach, but it's got to be built on evidence. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it have to be a middle balance there. So you cannot go from one stream to another. We went through the period of everyone at home because it was a context. Again, there was a reason. But now everyone have to be back. So if I think about our own example at work, we encourage the people to come to the office twice a week at least to encourage that, collaboration, that social element. But it's an explanation there for that. But equally, in another hand, it's not that it's fully mandated, the 5 days. So it's about everything. It's about having it, that.
But also that point you've made about reward being linked to it. Again, it's reinforcing we know best, right? So we're going to punish you if you don't follow the rules.
Right.
And I think that what we've been trying to do is create organisations where people are listened to, where they feel that they can have a proper conversation, a mature conversation about what works for them and how they work in the best way. And to end up saying, you've got to be here 3 days a week, and if you don't do that, we're not going to pay your bonuses, I think counterproductive. And I think it will create huge problems in some of those organisations.
So people will make choices, as you say, right?
Yeah, with their feet usually. If we're creating depersonalised organisations, isn't that everything that we've said?
And you won't be rewarding good behaviour or inclusive behaviour or something that is conductive. You will be doing the totally opposite. So, what kind of culture are you building?
The industry for this particular story is a high street bank, so financial services. Is there an element of risk mitigation for the organisation when we're talking about compliance? So by bringing people into the office, then perhaps mitigating some of that risk, and the onus is on the employees more than the employer then?
Sounds like a handoff.
You got us a figure out.
I mean, I think the point is all change is context specific, isn't it? So what I think we're all agreeing on is you need the HR director or chief people officer in those types of organisation has to try and get the organisation to face into that issue and to explore it with some depth and look at the evidence and look at the productivity and ask the people, when does it work for you? And then come up with something that works, because I think you can then sell it to people and they can understand the logic and where it's come from. But if you start saying it's about risk mitigation and you've got to be here 3 days a week, they're going to go, well, what risk? Tell me how me being here 3 days a week, which creates difficulty. I have to, when I'm in London, I have to commute for an hour and a half each way. That's 3 hours of non-productive time. When I work at home, I can do my prep, I can be on calls from 7 and I can work at it. I know I'm more productive in those days. But I need to be in meetings and I want to engage with people and have informal conversations. So, for professionals, you want people that can design their own work.
Yeah.
As much as you feel, we know from motivation that one of the things that drives motivation people at work is their ability to work in a way that suits them.
Autonomy.
Exactly.
So we've got to build that into our systems and ways of thinking.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about upcoming reforms to the apprenticeship system in England and touch on upskilling your workforce. So the UK government has announced a sweeping £3 billion overhaul of apprenticeship funding, with 120,000 new training opportunities for young people. This move recognises the need to tackle persistently high levels of youth unemployment, economic inactivity and a nationwide shortage of technical skills. From January 2026, employers will only be able to use apprenticeship levy funds to support level 7, which is master's level, for existing apprentices and those aged 16 to 21. The CIPD viewpoint on this is that while the aim of rebalancing the system towards young people is important, this approach risks undermining the overall breadth and ambition of the apprenticeship offer. CIPD have called for a more ambitious approach that genuinely expands opportunities and rebalances the system in favour of young people, including an apprenticeship guarantee for all 16 to 24-year-olds. We've also argued for a more nuanced approach to managing the costs of delivering higher-level apprenticeships. So, what are your thoughts on the announcement, and should apprenticeships be focused towards young people?
This is quite personal to me, I have to admit, because actually I did my MBA using that scheme, so I know I benefit of that, doing it at Henley Business School. And so the rest of the people in my cohort from many different organizations. So I know in first experience what is the benefit. Also, I've done quite a lot of work as well on age and ageism, or what we call as well the generational diversity. So I think, quoting what you said about being binary thinking, we are doing that. Young and versus older or more senior. Why is it different? What is going to be a difference on the way we learn, our learning needs, our needs, or any age for development, and the type of support they may need? So I think I appreciate maybe where they're coming from. Maybe the system needs to have some kind of fine tuning. I get that, and I think probably that's them. But maybe going into that direction probably is not the best one, especially because what is that? Being young. What is that label any longer? Are we going to stay working much longer? We want to work and continue learning much longer, not only that we want to. So are we limiting that capability as well of learning, and also, the value that all the different generations can give back to any workforce? So I think that's I feel a little bit more personal there, because I benefit of that one. So that's my experience and my opinion on that one.
I think the government's been. I don't think it's been radical. Don't think it's really thought about the issue. I think it's tinkering with a system that doesn't work. And if you look at the apprenticeship funding that we pay, employers pay, it's our money, and it goes back to the state. If it's not utilised, employers are not using the system, and the money is going back to the exchequer. Why is that? We all are talking about skills and talent and what we're looking to hire. So I think there should have been a much more radical overhaul of the apprenticeship levy and the way it's used. I think you need to give employers the ability to take a much more flexible approach. I think about age just being binary again. In reality, government has got a problem with young people. There is too much exclusion. There are a lot of young people that are sitting at home and not in education or at work. Now, do we need to do something like that? Absolutely. Is the apprenticeship levy really going to fundamentally get at that issue? I'm not convinced. So I think government policy in this area is, again, it's not been thought through. I would be advocating in the long term that employers should pay more into the apprenticeship levy or a training levy, but then encouraging us to use it in a much more flexible way. I mean, we do apprentices, we do a lot of stuff with young people. Yeah. It's really hard. It's bureaucratic. It takes time and effort. And what most employers do is we'll just treat it as a tax. We'll give the money and then we won't bother doing the stuff. So what the government's got to do is talk to employers, get them to provide the feedback so that it can be a system where everyone wants to participate and engage and utilise the funding to do things that are of benefit to their workforce and to individuals. So, I think there's a much more radical overhaul that's required at the moment. I think this is a bit of window dressing.
I agree. Completely. The system is too hard for employers to navigate. This isn't just the apprenticeship levy, is it though? This isn't the pay-in. This is about funding, which is, government into education for level 7 apprenticeships being limited to under 22s. Now, I'm all open to, more access for young people. That's welcome. But removing support for older learners, that's just going to make our workforces less resilient. Now, for me, this is not a rebalancing policy. No. This is a restriction. It's putting an extra restriction into the wider portfolio. I've got a lot to say on this. So I sit on a board at a FE college, and if this is to be the way from 2026, the system will not react within that timescale. Let me tell you, we're already into 2026, 2027 curriculum planning. This is like T levels all over again, which the industry, especially in education, is only just reacting to. It's a tinkering. It's not an overall redesign.
Rather than actually having thought through and say, okay, what is really the problem we are trying to solve here? I don't think it has been just like, oh, okay, almost like putting, something temporary, which is going to create perhaps more issues rather than addressing, as you are referring to, the actual problem of education, of investing in the young people, as well, to give them the skills that are needed for the future of work.
And I see this massively, widening the inclusivity gap as well, because if you think about level 7 apprenticeships, which are, way more vocational, they need, far more, written and numerical skills to get there. We are still living within an epidemic of our children leaving school with a way below, average level of reading, writing and arithmetic skill compared to other European countries. And then we're pushing probably more privileged folk into level 7 apprenticeships. It's just not going to work, the output.
And if you think from a macro perspective, if you really think about this from an economic perspective, we've got skill shortages, labour shortages, talent shortages, right? We're stifling immigration. We've got less people coming into the labour market, right? Employers wanting to grow. If you want to grow an economy, it's about private sector employers, having the right skills and talent and engineering. Right. So if you take it from a macro point of view, then what government should be doing is, with education and the training environment, is working with employers to think about what skills do you need over the next 5-10 years. We've got lots of people that are choosing not to participate. How do we get them back in? So how do you incentivize employers to work with young people and bring them into organisations and give them some kind of, as you say, competency that will give them the ability to earn a living and not rely on benefits. And I think we've also got to recognise that we've got to take a responsibility to invest in it as well. I was hoping that this government would have a much more inclusive, well thought out education and training response, and this does just
performative. It's just been too reactive rather than thinking, as I mentioned, what is really the problem we're trying to solve here. And I think it's building on your point. Many of us in the profession, the typical thing we hear, especially from our leaders, is, we lack of talent, we cannot get the right skills, we cannot get the right competency. Well, we are not investing on that future of work. So therefore, like with artificial intelligence coming and everything else, all the changes, are we preparing the workforce for that? We are not.
So next up, is breaking the rules what's needed to break barriers in performance? So a so-called Enhanced Games is set to debut in Las Vegas in 2026. This is a controversial new Olympic-style sporting event where athletes will be permitted and even encouraged to use certain performance-enhancing drugs, all in the name of exploring new, previously unexplored levels of human potential. It's a move that's polarised opinion, some claiming it's cheating and unethical, and others saying it's pioneering, experimental and bound by completely different rules. So in a workplace context, when does performance enhancement become cheating or unethical? Drugs or AI, or in a broader sense, when is it acceptable to break away from the norm and mutually agree to ignore good practice in order to achieve desired results. Another conversation I'm sure could go on for a very long time.
It's a huge question.
You want to keep the answers concise then.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, in 10 seconds. No. What's your take?
Well, look, I mean, I think, you've got to have some boundaries, right? So we've got regulation or legislation, right? That creates an environment for businesses. So that's clearly a given, I think.
That's right.
And then I think, I think this is a leap forward. I think most organisations are quite poor at getting the best from their workforce. Mm-hmm. Their current workforce working in normal ways. So before we start thinking about, augmentation of the body or mind-enhancing drugs that could enable people to work even more productively, why don't we just go back to basics, right? And think about how we are managing our current workforces. Are we fully utilising the skills and capabilities of our... And I think from an HR perspective, I think every organisation I've been in, I think there's room for improvement. And I think that's where we should focus rather than worrying about whether we should be encouraging people to augment themselves or giving them, enhancing drugs to improve their performance.
It's such a, intellectually stimulating to think about, because I can put myself in, thinking about either angle. But when I was thinking about it, there's something around the power imbalance for me that I think this topic brings through. It's kind of like, fire and rehire dressed in lycra, isn't it? Be these conditions, be this, be that, augment this. Where does, as Kevin says, where does the legislation and governance then come in to be the undercurrent of whatever, and where does it stop?
Yeah.
I mean, we were saying outside of the room, it kind of gives talent more choice if that's the way that employment moves, because some employers will be more early adopters of different practices, but it creates, corruption and that imbalance of power for me.
Yeah, and pressure on people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like what you both say, yes, we need to have boundaries, but equally we're taking it too far, It's all about getting the right balance, and let's not forget the context, which I always refer at the beginning. One side does not fit all. Each organisation is different, and each individual comes with their own context when they come to the organisation. So are we taking all of this into account to get the best, as you say, of the skills and what you have to offer to the organisation, the value added that you have? Are we? Not really. Are we still operating with the old models in the new world? But probably that's what we're doing as an organisation, as an individual. We are human. At the end of the day, that's normal, that happen. But I think as a profession, we got that responsibility, as you say earlier as well. Okay, hold on a second. Let's take a step back and let's challenge those decisions to make sure that are we creating the right environment for the talent to thrive or not.
This is a new segment for the podcast that we're bringing in for this episode.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is turn you into trusted advisors to support on a question that's come up in our fabulous CIPD community, which I'd recommend everyone to look at. So there's a thread that's been circulating, and at the heart of it is a challenge that many people, professionals, will recognise. So what it is essentially is the need for an HR manager to strike the balance between compassion and managerial accountability. Mm-hmm. So the scenario centres on supporting an employee with frequent mental health related sickness absence. Understandably, over time, this has started to affect wider team performance. So what piece of advice or nugget of wisdom would you offer someone in the profession, perhaps a line manager, who's trying to manage repeated short or long-term absence with empathy and compassion, but who's also accountable for team performance, morale, and making sure that the work gets done? We
sometimes jump into conclusions and we don't communicate, okay? We all have bias, and that's fine. We are human. We don't know, I mean, some maybe artificial intelligence by now, but it's how we use that bias. So I'm not jumping into conclusions. I'm asking the right questions and understanding, okay, that individual, what is the pattern of absence and why is that absence happening, and am I creating that environment or not for that individual? And it may be a reason, and therefore I need to address it with performance management, but we cannot do that with absolutely everything. Are we creating, as I mentioned earlier, that environment where the people will feel free and safe to tell me, I got this situation, or simply I don't like working here, maybe. I don't know. And then, have that open conversation and manage that as appropriate, but taking each case on their own merit, not applying one size fit it all.
Yeah, definitely.
So isn't it? It goes to the heart of great people management, doesn't it? Which is, in reality, you've got to ask the questions and have a conversation, which might be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
It might be quite difficult for the person on the other side of the table to be talking about their mental health and what activates that. Why is it happening? And you may end up with situations about, it could be about addiction, it could be about home life, it could be about all sorts of things. So what we've got to be able to do is train our managers to be able to have that conversation, right? That's the first thing, is you do have to have the conversation, because that's how you do the investigation and find out what's going on. Then it can be a range of different responses. It could be, actually, I think this person is, perhaps they're, not behaving correctly, and, so it could be performance management. It could be, I need to refer someone to occupational health, or I need to, make adjustments to their working hours, or whatever. So the point is, there's a whole range of different responses, but the fundamental thing is have the conversation, right? And then the second thing I always say about this is you've got to make sure that there is a communication to other members of the team afterwards, because the one thing is you need other people to be empathetic to the individual. And you might be saying, this person's going to be working 3 days a week for a period of time, and they need to understand why. Because otherwise, people are being seen favourably, they've been let off, or whatever it might be. So for me, it's all about having the tough conversation, exploring things in a really empathetic way, thinking about the right response, and then thinking about how you communicate it to others.
Yeah, it's like diffusing the ambiguity of it all, isn't it? I completely agree. So, recognise the person, not just the pattern. But like Kevin said, it's not your responsibility to fix it overnight, but it is your responsibility to face it. So use data, evidence-based, get the right people in the room, make sure there's clarity, and then, take it from there.
That's all for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Francisca Beloso, Alix Bolton and Kevin Green, for sharing your thoughts, and as ever to you, our listeners, as well. We'll include a link to a number of useful resources discussed in the episode in the show notes. And remember, we publish new episodes of the HR People Pod every fortnight. So make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to us and catch up on anything you've missed on demand. I've been Steve George, and this has been the HR People Pod.